Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're having some technical difficulties, but we're figuring them out. And I apologize. The Spanish closed caption translations will not be working. I could not get that app to work. So we're going to keep working on it, but I'm sorry, it's not going to work tonight. My name's Megan Monahan. I'm co-manager of Kids First, department of the city of Aspen. And we're really excited to have Jill present IEP 101. Just want to kind of remind everybody we're learning about IEPs in general. We're not going to talk about specific kids. So questions that are about specific kids can come in, offline or something, but we're going to keep it pretty general. And that's who I am. And why don't we go around and everybody just say your name, the school you're working at, and then Jill can get started. So I'm gonna popcorn to Renee.
Hi guys, I'm gonna be in and out. Lucky enough to be traveling to Denver, but I am Renee Giles and I'm with Aspen Family Connections. I'm the Early Childhood Resource Coordinator. So I'm excited to be here tonight to learn more from Jill.
Who are you gonna popcorn to?
Don't know.
How about Murray? Murray, you're next.
Murray.
We cannot hear you, Murray. Still can't hear you. So let's go to Mallory while Murray's working out her sound.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Mallory and I am a director at the Early Learning Center.
And how about we pop over to Jenny.
Hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I can't get my picture up there for some reason, but I am the lead teacher in the pre-K classroom at Wildwood School. Thank you.
And how about Raquel?
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Hi. I am in class still with a few kiddos, but I am going to be in and out as well. My name is Raquel. I am a preschool teacher lead here in Growing Years in Basalt.
Hello.
How about Kiki?
Howdy, I'm Kiki. I'm a teacher at Ajax Cubs, and I teach 3 to 5.
And how about Lizzie?
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I work in the same room as Kiki at Ajax Cubs with 3 to 5-year-olds.
And how about Geneva?
Hi, I'm Geneva. I work here at Ajax Cubs with Lizzie and Kiki as well. And I'm in the classroom for 1.5 to 2.5.
How about Andrea?
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm a toddler teacher for my Ajax Cubs.
Perfect. And Georgia?
Hi, I work at Wildwood in the Younger Dome with 2.5 to 4-year-olds. And also Megan Anna is asking me,
No, I'm in, Georgia.
Oh, you're in now. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
It just wouldn't
Never
work
mind.
on my computer. Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Oh, so Tina is texting me saying she can't get in.
Yeah,
It's saying that there's another meeting, but I don't have another meeting. So do you know what I'm saying?
Tell-
It's one meeting room.
I'll tell her to because that's what it kept saying to me, and I tried like 5 times, but I went on my phone and it worked. So I'll tell her to go on her phone.
I'm so sorry, you guys.
Right.
So Anna, did you introduce yourself?
No, sorry, I'm Anna Chain. I work at Wildwood with Georgia and Bella, and we teach 2.5 to 4-year-olds.
Great. And then Julie? Okay, so Julie is not jumping on, but that's okay. Jill, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jill Pidcock, and I am the director for the Arc of the Central Mountains. We are primarily an advocacy organization. We support 4 counties in the Central Mountain area. We do a lot of advocacy within the schools, but we're lifespan. So from birth on, the majority of our advocacy work really is in that school-aged population. We also do a lot of outreach activities, including a Best Buddies prom that we are helping to sponsor coming up next week. Just a shameless plug on that one. Renee will appreciate that. But we do a lot of education. So most of that education is with families, but some of it is like we're doing tonight, which is kind of a basic overview of IEP, the IEP system. I think this is going to be really good because this really is going to take a little bit of Part C services, which is early intervention, and it's going to transition into Part B services, which is an IEP. So you go from an IFSP to an IEP, which I will not use that. Let me not use acronyms. An IFSP is an individualized family service plan, and an IEP is an individualized education plan. So I apologize, and please stop me if I use acronyms that you don't know, because some of you may know some of these special education terms and some of you won't. So please stop me and ask me those questions. And Megan, maybe you can help me if there's somebody in the chat asking a question, because Megan's going to be my IT person. So all of us I had some issues getting on too. So we all kind of had some issues with that. So it's going to be a little bit of both and how that transitions. The reason this is really important is because when students are on, and maybe some of your students haven't been identified yet, but let's just assume that the students are on some kind of a IFSP, so it's Part C services. It's a very different system. It goes from really helping families and how does their child interact within their home and within community. And then we switch over to Part B services, which is the IEP, that individualized education plan, where it becomes all about the student, all about accessing that academic world. And suddenly families are kind of like the second thought. So it's a really, really scary time for parents. I'm hoping this is going to help you to understand how you can speak to parents and really incorporate them as being part of your team. And so that's really, as you're thinking about that, put that lens on of, you're new to this language and so are parents. So if you can just all keep that in mind and utilize them as part of your team. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's go to the next slide. I already kind of talked about this a little bit.
Okay, so I haven't been sharing my screen, have I?
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
I'm sharing now.
Okay, sorry. There we go. And I will get out of, there we go. Okay, so this is the second slide, which is, if you see, this is, so IDEA, which is the law that we have that has a very old law, by the way, that needs, well, that's another story. I won't go to the politics of all that. IDEA has been around for a very long time, and this is different from the ADA, which is the Adults with Americans with Disabilities Act oversees 504 plans. But what we're going to talk about tonight is IDEA, and there are several parts to it, but I really want to just focus mostly on the Part C, which is birth to 3 years. A lot of you are in that situation right now. And then you move right away from Part B, which is age 3 to 21. Sometimes it's 18, but it can go to all the way to 20, all the way through their 21st year. So let's go to the next slide. And again, there you go, perfect. I was just going to say I'm kind of moving first through this. So I want you to hear that this is the preamble for IDEA. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and is in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy to ensure equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. For the sake of time, usually I would say to you, okay, so what words in here might stick out to you? So go ahead and we'll just advance the slide because we may have questions. I don't want to take too much time in this. So this slide is starting to show you some of those, go back one slide for a second. You can see that some of these are some of the important things to think about. Natural, improving educational results, equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, economic self-sufficiency. So these are some of the things to think about of what this law is helping to develop and to protect. Okay. We'll go to the next slide. Great. What you're going to see here is, this is the early intervention special education process flow. So this is birth to 3. And most of you know that as you do birth to 3, that at age 2 years, 6 months, you're already starting to transition that student by the time they're 3 to go into the next section of their into that IEP world. So for my example is that when my son, who I am a mom of a kid with who is on the autism spectrum, but he wasn't identified until he was 2 years and 6 months. So we had a very short amount of time to work with early intervention with that IFSP, where they were helping us as a family before we were already starting to talk about what does that transition look like into an IEP. So again, I want to emphasize the importance of the role that you all play in not only the student's life, but also the family's lives, and how you can set this up for an amazingly good career in quotes, for this student going through the special education process. So what you see here is going to be a process flow, and this is of the early intervention flow. And then we're going to show you and compare. I'm going to be doing a lot of comparisons and where there's a slight difference between these systems. So this is just the first line, and you'll see all of these different boxes of what we're going to be looking at, which is the initial identification, and then evaluation, eligibility, and then we go into the IFSP or the IEP, which is what we're going to show you, the implementation, and then the review. That's very similar to IEP, but we're going to continue on and show you a little bit more about that. So once again, this is that transition. Next slide. This is just that whole transition place from one fishbowl to another for this little fish who happens to be this either student / parent. And so I usually do this presentation to parents, and so I stop me if there's anything you need to know, because I really try to neutralize it so parents can understand it in parent language, because they're just starting to learn all that language as well. Okay, she says she's having trouble here and the right link to join the meeting. I'll let you take that one. Okay, so William Bridges says it's not the changes that do us, and it's the transitions into those changes. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. All right. So in that transition timeline, as we discussed, you start planning early in that IFSP, that transition time, and that's from 3 to 9 months. As soon as the child knows, into their 3rd birthday, before the child's 3rd birthday. The transition conference is held at least 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday. And the final transition planning and arrangement up to the child's 3rd birthday. So there's a lot that's packed into that age 2 years and 3 months, and as we're starting to go into this next educational plan. We can advance to the next slide. A lot of you, and I don't assume that all of you are in an IFSP world with your students, because sometimes they're not identified until they're till they're older than 5 years old or older than 3 years old. But this is how the transition program works from the IFSP. So they're moving from one system to another if they've already been receiving services. So the components of that, what's next for the child, and reviewing again that current assessment. You're going to see this also when we talk about the IEP. The specifics about the services and the settings. And so where are those services being provided? And what are the activities and the strategies to help to prepare the child for the new setting? So this is all about what does this look like? This is not much different from what any typical kid is going to be going through between early, between their preschool and pre-K into kindergarten or preschool. I mean, they're all students are learning the same thing, right? They're learning socialization. They're learning how to, some of those playing together and courtesy and all those same things. All students are learning, which is what I try to tell parents, is that your child is really at this young age is really learning. The majority of what they're learning is what every kid is learning. So it's not so much so significantly different for the learning of what's being learned. We'll go to the next slide. These are just a couple of modules. If you want to go to the CDE, has these modules that will talk a little bit more in depth for if you want to go deeper into this after today, excuse my dog. And it'll tell you some of these modules, and then they are still active modules on CDE's website. I will try to put that into, if you've ever tried to navigate CDE, it's a challenge. So I would highly recommend that you take that website and then just follow that, and that'll take you to those modules. And that I would invite you to do that if you want to learn a little bit more. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about pre-planning, and what we need to know is who's on the team for pre-planning. And to learn that we are really all in this together, whether it's an IFSP or whether it is an IEP. We're all in this together. When I say we all, that team includes a school team. It includes the home. It includes somebody who may be taking, as they're littles, as they're in the IFSP or they're 0 to 3, it may include a grandmother. It may include an au pair, depending on where you are. I never had that, but that may include that. It definitely includes the parent. And then as they get older, and we always encourage from about middle school on, that we encourage the individual student to really participate in their own individualized education plan. So keeping in mind that family is very much a part of the team, starting at the young age, but then definitely moving into the IEP team. Okay, next slide. So as you saw before, this is very similar to the arrow that you saw before. And this is as we're starting to go into the part B, or the IEP services. It is the administrative unit. So I'm a little unclear about who's got which administrative unit within all of your early intervention programs or any of your early childhood programs. So in Aspen, let's just say that in Aspen, it is Aspen Schools. It is the administrative unit. They are the ones that maintain and manage to make sure everything is done correctly. All the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. So as we start within that Part B service, we're going to go to the next slide. There you go. We're looking at the initial identification. Now we're going to assume that even if you're going from Part C to Part B, the student still will need to go through an initial identification from as that student's coming in. So it's not an automatic, although more often than not, a student who is 3 and who's going into preschool will probably qualify for services. Child Find is one of those places, but there needs to be this initial identification for the student that there's something going on. We're not sure what, but there's something going on. As they're very little, it's not uncommon as we start to look at what the determinations are and what the eligibility classifications are. It's not uncommon to have something that's more universal. So for example, a preschooler with a delay. And so it's very generally speaking, because this is all forming out, right? Again, all students are learning. Remember what I said, that all students are kind of learning sort of the same thing. But this is the initial time that we're looking at. Is there something going on? And then we start to look at that. Is that happening? We'll go to the next slide. Oh, can we go back one? There we go. I think that's it. Sorry, we'll just keep going. We'll keep going. So once we've decided that we are going to do that, there is something going on. I have it side by side here of what this early intervention from Part C looks like. And then also then on the right-hand side is going to be what that preschool age 3 to 5 looks like. So there's slight differences in the early intervention, that birth to 3. There are 2 or more professionals from different disciplines who complete the developmental evaluation in all of 5 areas for the development of to determine the significant delay in the student. As you go to an IEP team, 3 to 5, the team of qualified professional determines if the child has an educational disability. So We're really focusing, again, I'm backing up with the early intervention. How does this child interact? How is this child within the environment of community, home, those kinds of things? And now we start to go into this Part B services, which is all about accessing the educational environment. Okay. So after the evaluation happens, we go right into that eligibility piece of it. And keeping in mind that the disability label does not determine the services that we're going to be looking at. The disability label only says that the child is eligible for services because of a delay or disability in that particular area. So keeping in mind, and again, parents will come and want to know, well, they'll want a certain eligibility or disability listed, because in some train of thought, or some parent has told some parent has told some parent that you'll get better services if you have a diagnosis of autism. And really, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to meet the student's needs no matter what the student's disability is. So keeping in mind that it's not the disability label that's going to be that's going to determine where the eligibility of this. Let's see, is there anything in here I want to say that is important for you to note? That's in the birth to 3. It's that significant developmental delay in one or more areas, 25% adaptive, physical, social, emotional, communication, and cognitive. And I want to say early intervention may have changed that. I'm looking into space as if I'm trying to figure out in the last couple of years if that has changed, if it has to be one or more of the areas at 25%. I think that percentage changed actually.
It did. It went to 33%. If it's in multiple areas of 25% delay, but otherwise it has to be 33%.
Thank you. I knew there was something that had changed, and I had not updated this slide for that reason. So now as we compare that over to the 3 to 5, it's a condition which prevents the child from receiving reasonable education benefit from general education. You must meet specific criteria for specific educational disability, and we're going to show you in a second what some of those categories are. But you'll notice I'm not going to say ever, and parents may say this, but you're not going to hear ever that the best program, the best plan. We want to say that, and you'll see it said reasonable. Now, that word reasonable has certainly been discussed and argued in courts about what is reasonable, what's that floor for what reasonable is. But we want to always look at how we're meeting the needs for the student itself, not necessarily the best, or the best programming, but we are actually looking at what the needs of the student are. So we'll go to the next slide. So these are some of the categories that you might see in Part B for disability. And you'll see that that I was going to just say what that orange is, that the most common ones for preschool age children are that autism spectrum disorder, developmental delay, and speech or language impairment. But all of these are also considered as eligibility for services. Please ask questions if you have them as we're going. So right now we're going to so we've already done the initial, we've already done this initial identification. We've done the evaluation now. We've determined what the eligibility is. And now we're going to start to create that individualized plan development. Okay. So keeping in mind that in both of these, that I, again, is individualized. So it's important to think about those unique qualities about that student. And what you'll see in your IEP, in your documents as you're creating an IEP, is it's really going to start talking about the strengths of the student, the skill sets that the student has, some of their particular needs and how it shows up. This is where it's really important to have that family input, because they have the PhD on their kid, and they're going to be able to tell you things that you would never know about their kid, keeping in mind that you all have all the education when it comes to supports and curricula. And so now we're trying to merge that all together. And so it's really important to understand what those strengths of that student is and why it impacts them in certain ways at certain times. Go to the next slide. And so again, we can do this by developing that information about the child. It's important that this be strengths-based, as I just said, with the parents contributing. And one of the things I can remember when my son was moving into his preschool ages, we talked about ways that they could use some of his interests and create strategies around that. So for my son, and I'm going to just use my son a lot in this so that you understand, but for my son, he was obsessed with penguins when he moved I think he was moving into kindergarten at that time, just obsessed with that. That was what his obsession was. Well, we used those penguins, the school used those penguins to help teach things, right? Because they had his attention with the penguins. And so learning about that from the family was one of those ways of being able to really be able to create a strategy that was going to assist my son and other children as you get to this. Also keeping in mind that you're also going to learn about what does the day look like for the student? What is the kid like in the morning? What does that student look like in the afternoon? If that child doesn't sleep well, it's important for you all to know when that student is coming into your classroom, that student may have a problem with sleeping, and that might impact their mood, or maybe their food or their sugar levels drop. All those things that are important to understand about, that you can glean that information from other parents. Okay, we'll skip that next slide. Okay. So what is the what? It's important for teams to take the information from all the sources of data that they use creating the child's profile and prioritize the needs. Again, we're looking at the needs. These needs should be foundation of why they will be receiving special education in preschool. They can help to guide how you'll be teaching the child. But before you know what you're going to teach, you need to know what it is that the child needs to learn. And the what will become the basis for the goals and the services and the accommodations that this needs to reflect in the family priorities as well. So for this, we want to look at what we call the IEP worthy, the what we need to teach in addition to what every other child is working on, whether it's sitting in a circle or cooperating with friends. They should address the following things: the barriers that the child may be experiencing, missing the foundational skills that other students of their age have in place, difficulty with prerequisite skills. So a building block for a particular skill would be one of those examples. Okay, we'll skip to the next slide. So then as you're determining those needs, they're not the services. So a child doesn't need speech therapy. So again, this is where parents often get stuck. They want to come into a meeting and they want to talk about all the services that their child needs to be able to get where they need to go. But that's not the way that's not how we develop a good, strong IEP or a good, strong IFSP for that matter. The needs are what the child needs to be able to do in order to participate with the family, if it's an IFSP, or in the classroom, if it's an IEP. The child's needs will be able to answer questions as the teacher and students can understand. The child needs to be able to talk, these are examples, needs to be able to talk to friends on the playground. The child needs to be able to say, I need to go to the bathroom. So self-advocacy, communication, social skills, those are some of the ideas of what needs are as they're so young. We're not necessarily talking about, I just got out of an IEP meeting where we were talking about sequence of the sequencing of numbers and a sequence of functioning. That is not what we're talking about in this particular thing. We're really talking about how it is appropriate for age appropriate within that either preschool setting or in that or going into kindergarten, or whether it's preschool. I guess two. I heard a lot of you say that you had 2.5-year-olds. So that's really right on that precipice and on that age of really helping the family understand how to help the family understand how they can assimilate within their own family unit and what needs to happen, and feeding, learning how to eat, those kinds of things. So it's all needs. It's a really interesting time that you guys are working with students, because there are systems that are going to overlap, and then there are systems that seem like a very big jump for some of these students. Does that make, I hope you guys are writing down any questions that you might have. And again, if you have questions, stop me in the moment, but we'll go back to questions. Okay. Now we're going to talk about those outcomes and goals. In part C, this step is the process which is called outcomes. And in part B, it is called annual goals. Setting outcomes or goals is an important part of the process, and families should have a lot of input into defining what they want as outcomes or goals. Later in the process, the team can help you to define how, help the family to decide how to accomplish them. But in the beginning, we need to talk about what those, that important what, the important what for the outcomes that are important here. I don't think you guys can see the differences in the comparison. I hope this is helpful to see those comparisons, to see the slight differences, the subtle differences. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So IEP goals focus on academic activities of a child in this age and our function and what their function is. So what will the child need to do to be successful in learning in real life activities? Be sure to prioritize and only work on a few outcomes or goals at a time. This is also something that's somewhat of a struggle for parents because they think they need to have a whole bunch of goals to be able to serve a whole bunch of things in order to serve their child. I learned that the hard way. I went from, I think, 9 goals when my kiddo was in kindergarten. It's a lot of goals. But you'll find that families have a sense of security when they know that their child is having more goals addressed, I think. Let's see. So I would say that even though there are a lot of needs that the family wants to have met, you need to pick the top few things that you'd like to be working on within that 365 days, because this is not, and keeping in mind that an IEP or an IFSP can be amended at any time. Just because it's an annual IEP that changes. If a child meets a goal, then we come together and we find another goal that's going to advance that child. If a child or student is just not getting there, we come back to the table and we talk about what could we do to modify this goal so that it's working better to addressing, maybe add another objective within the goal that kind of breaks down that initial goal. So these things can be changed all the time. For compliance reasons, it has to be done annually, but we can meet more often than that when it comes to meetings and the flexibility of that. You want to emphasize the positive with the student. Definitely, you're always going to be doing that, and why this is, anything as you're phrasing those goals, it's what you're living into, what you want to see as that end result. But what's also really important in the goals are making sure that they're measurable and that you can observe them. If I'm ever sitting at your table at an IEP meeting, I will probably ask about data and what the progress monitoring on those goals are, because you can't really change an IEP goal. You don't really know what you're looking at unless you're keeping that data, which creates that progress. So you can really see how to move forward on that goal. And that's, I believe in most schools, you usually get those progress monitoring reports twice a year at the semesters. If you're lucky as a parent, you can find schools that will work with you more often if you want to see that in real time. And a parent has the right to ask for that, has a right to ask you to see some of that progress if they really want to see it ahead of time, ahead of that the formal progress monitoring. Again, I wanted to go up that you should write them in plain language and not jargon. What you will see in IEPs is you're going to see state standards that are always listed on all of those IEP forms, which is not understandable to, you're looking at things that are not understandable to parents. And so we really want to keep it parent friendly and also for yourselves. What are you trying to accomplish here? So keeping it that plain language is a really important thing. Okay, go to the next slide. One of my favorites, the difference between accommodations and modifications. So preschool, many accommodations that have been successful are used throughout the classroom for all children because, as I said before, many children are needing supports to be successful. Examples of that are classroom schedules or guidelines of how to line up. So some of those visual tools that are used in all classrooms. And that's what an accommodation is how can you help to support a student to learn? And whether it's where they sit, where if they're fidgety, can they have breaks? Can you take them out? Can you do some more activities? What I believe is that at this age group that you have these students, these are the things that again, all students are learning. And so it's not that out of the ordinary. You're already doing, if I were talking to you and you were all 7th grade teachers, I might be reminding you of the things that you already know and that you're doing on a daily basis. So these are the accommodations that help to support the student in learning those things. As they get older, it gets a little bit more defined, like extra time for tests, or maybe being able to use notes in a test, or frequent breaks where they can walk away if they need to. But for now, we're really talking about those things that are successful within your classroom specifically. When we talk about a modification, that is actually a change to the curriculum. So you're actually looking at how do you need to modify the curriculum in order to meet this child at their level, to be able to then have them be able to advance in their academic piece of this. General ed teachers oftentimes do not understand the difference between accommodations and modifications. They think it's all the same. So that was also one of those things that I like to make sure that you all know already as you're going into this, and you can help your gen ed teachers as well, that it's again, the difference between that accommodation, how help to meet their goal. And then the modification is if you're going to change what the curriculum is. I think that hits it about right.
I have a question. Can you give just a really simple example of an accommodation versus a modification?
In a preschool setting, right? In the setting. All right. Let's say that the student really, really is struggling with standing in line, and you want to, instead of pushing it to stand in line behind other students, maybe that student gets to learn that this week they get to be the front of the line. And so it's accommodating where they're maybe struggling that they don't want to be in the back of the line. Talking maybe about a circle, when you have the circle time. Let's see, what would you do with circle time? Potentially, if a student is really antsy and can't sit still, an accommodation might be to allow that student to sit in a chair, that may be a weighted chair of some kind, allowing the student to have a fidget toy so that their focus goes on that fidget toy. It's usually something at this age, it's oftentimes a sensory kind of a thing. And so is it sound? Keeping in mind that a student may have a sensory overload where, and you all probably do too, I know I do, fluorescent lighting just is not good for me, kills me. And that buzz. So not only is the kid seeing the fluorescent light, but the buzz, and they're listening to all that, and they're trying to listen to the instruction, keeping in mind how can we make this have the student be in a position in the schoolroom that's not quite so distracting. That's one of those things I would say. I think when you're talking about, sometimes it's using manipulatives a lot, which you're already doing with all other students, but what is it tactily that student needs? Sometimes they don't want to be in the water or their sand tables or whatever you all have going on in your classroom. Sometimes those sensory things need to be changed so that there's an accommodation where they don't have to do a certain activity with a certain, like I said, that maybe a manipulative is what I'm using as an example. Maybe the feel of a certain manipulative doesn't work, so they don't use that one. They get to use something different. A modification would be if you're looking at, I'm just going to pull something out of my hat because it's been so long since I had babies around. Let's say that you are talking about sorting, and you're wanting to run this sorting exercise over and over with students. Like, I don't know, maybe you'd repeat it 4 times to make sure the student understands that you're sorting 3 blocks, 3 green blocks, 3 red blocks, 3 orange blocks, and you're doing it maybe a succession of 4 times. A modification to that would be you'd only do it 2 times. That if the student is showing that they're proficient at that they've got it, you don't make them do it again and again and again, and maybe they need that modified. Or maybe it's that they need help with maybe they need to just do it 1 time so that they understand what the sorting is. Why are they doing this sorting? I wanted to go back to accommodations as I was talking about manipulatives. Fine motor skills, this is a big time for students to be learning their fine and gross motor skills and what they can do with those things. So you may, as in teachers and instructors, be recognizing where they may need some assistance. Maybe it's a weighted pencil, maybe it's or how they're sometimes it's when they're eating, maybe they need a weight on their spoon. I'm just trying to think of some of the things that I saw from that either comes from a physical therapist or comes from an occupational therapist. You all will probably see some of those things even before their parents do, because you're watching so many other students that are their age appropriate and they're doing these things. So that's also suggestions for accommodations of how they may need a crayon instead of a pencil. I'm just saying things that are easier for them to use as for their fine motor skills. So that's another example that would be probably would be appropriate for the student, the ages that you have going on. Does that answer that question?
Thank you.
Sure. Go to the next slide. It's going to give you some examples. So what do I want to say here? So this is some of the services that we are talking about with early intervention. So the services that I just mentioned, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language, you see that a lot within your classrooms and such. So these are some of the examples of some of the services. Audiology, you often will see when it's the early intervention, which is that part C, birth to 3. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychological therapy, so school psychons and social workers, things like that. You'll see that it's very similar in the related education services for an IEP as well. Some of those, again, those common ones are speech language, are occupational therapy, is sometimes that school psych and working with that mental health aspect of it with the kids. But then the other one of those that's coming in now would be transportation. Does the student need special transportation to be able to get to the school? And so that was never a part of the early intervention, part C, but now we're talking about that on the IEP, which would be part of that transportation. And then what I don't see on this slide would also be potentially ESY as they start to get a little bit older, which is the oh God, I've lost the ESY acronym. Help me out, Renee. It's a summer program. Extended school year. Thank you. I was saying how it's just really sad when you get older that things just dump out of your brain and you can never get them back. It's very sad for me that that's going on in my world now, but again, keeping in mind that these services, the disability should not be what's dictating the services. The services don't come into play first. The services come into play after we've determined the goal. So the services support the goal. And again, that's something that a parent will oftentimes come in and say, my child needs more speech therapy. My child needs more time with the speech language. But if the goal indicates that in order to reach that goal, that's what we're looking at as far as the numbers are concerned, as far as the amount of minutes are concerned. Again, a hard one for families to sometimes take on, because they think that more services mean their student is going to get to their goal, reach their goal faster. Not necessarily true. Okay, what does the next slide show us? So placement, and this is where we start to talk about the least restrictive environment. In part C, we're talking about a natural environment and those daily routines, everyday things, wherever the children without disabilities would typically be. That's what we're kind of focusing on within that part C services. And similar to this are requirements for children over the age of 3 who qualify for early intervention services is the least restrictive environment. And this will follow them throughout their IEP career, so to speak. You always want to start with the least restrictive environment. You don't want to start with the most restrictive environment. Related services within this also again, we talked about transportation. If that student needs to be transported in a special transportation versus a school bus with their natural peers. Okay, we're gonna go forward. So determining the strengths. So in part C, the concerns and the priorities of the family is a required component in developing an IFSP. And in part B, the concerns and the priorities of the family should be discussed, but are not recorded on the IEP. On the IEP, in the needs section is part of the current levels. This might be where that's shown. There was also a part in the IEP that will say parent input. It's really important to have that parent input included in. And that might also be, as I said before, it might be a grandmother, it might be somebody who spends a lot of time with what they're seeing in there. It's important to think about your child's needs, the child's needs, and you can have an idea of how those needs are going to be met. But it's important to have it, yes, have the student, have the parent involvement, because again, they're the PhD on their child, but it's a little bit different from, again, from what the priorities were birth to 3. Now we're moving into how we are working within our peers within a school environment, educational environment. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the implementation. As you can see, we're going right along that little arrow of what we're working on and how we're going to implement it. We want to talk about a working plan, and communication is really important. Calling a meeting, really engaging your parent, getting their input in this, supporting the plan, everybody on the same page for the plan. And the willingness for everybody to make changes if it's not working. Again, I said before, you have this meeting, this annual meeting, but that doesn't mean we can't change it up if something isn't working, or if the student, again, has excelled. I always like to make sure that we talk about the student excelling in some of that as well. Okay, next slide. This is my superhero service provider. And that includes you as teachers as well. Oh, I'm sorry, I went back to yeah, there we are. It's my superhero. So a service provider is not going to come in and be the super therapist. And we want to make sure that everybody knows, especially your families know, that this is a team effort, and that it's not going to be one or the other that's going one therapist or one educator that's going to make all the difference. It's a team as the effort. It's not going to be one person's coming in and saving the day. And unfortunately, as wonderful as these people are who come into this student's life, they're not going to be in that student's life forever. So as they transition into different age groups, it becomes different people. You're always going to have a different team. And so we want to make sure that people know that it's not about one person. It's about the team collectively working together. So I think you can, I don't know if this is one of those that goes on and feeds in. Yeah, go ahead and hit that next one. So who has as much influence on what? So the child's outcome. So in early intervention, the services were in place to help you solve the problems related to the daily routines and making those days go better. As we move into preschool, parent involvement is that you want to bring the parent involvement as well as the classroom teacher, and how the child can participate with the whole classroom. So it's not just the daily environment at home, but the whole classroom and other peers. You, as a classroom teacher, you want to be able to share the successes with the other professionals that are working with that student. So working as a team, again, together as a whole team as we're working through this. Go to the, you want to include the family in those preschool activities and the events. Ask them, get those families to come and see that their child is very similar to every other child. They're not all that different. So have them volunteer in the classroom. I know sometimes that seems scary, but have them get very involved in that particular, with the child, so that they can see that their kid is more normal than not normal. Because I think we all, as a parent, I'm coming as a parent, we're afraid that they're just not the same and they're never going to achieve the same thing. But then when we can see them in a general ed classroom learning from their natural peers, it's good. I think it's really good for families to see that. So include them in that as much as you possibly can. I recall being in a classroom when my son was young, that I volunteered. I tried not to volunteer in his classroom, but when I did volunteer, I made sure, she made sure that she gave me an activity that was maybe going to make copies, or not so much always in the classroom, right? So I could still be around, but that I wasn't that crutch for my kid, and I also wasn't being overly critical of what I was seeing. So, you know, just be creative of how you're involving your families into this, and who has that influence for those student outcomes. Okay, next slide. Let me get to where you are. I'm looking at another slide as I'm going with you. So, okay. So why is it so critical? I think I've kind of talked about a lot of this with you already, that it's critical because that's creating a really good team. And again, you're the experts in the educational environment and in that preschool environment and in that, but the families are experts on what's going on for their kids. There's ways of doing this. It's surprising to me when I meet up with students or families that their kid is in middle school and they've never had a communication book that goes back and forth. And the communication that goes back and forth is both, it's information both ways. It's an information pipeline. You're learning what happened at home. You're learning if that child woke up having a nightmare and didn't have a good night's sleep. You're learning about and children present differently. And if you all are parents, you know this. Students present differently at home and at school. Sometimes kids act out at school and they're angels at home, where parents will say, well, we don't see that behavior at home. My son never does that at home. I never see him doing that. Or vice versa. Well, we're not seeing that at school. He's an angel at school. We don't see that. So making sure that that's an information pipeline back and forth is a really great thing to be able to do. Again, I said that volunteering in the classroom was an example of what we did when, and I encourage that, going on those field trips. Reading, as you know, encouraging families to do some of that schoolwork at home, to have the same language, whatever you're doing, whether it's, I say schoolwork, but you know, whatever you're teaching at school, how can that be adapted into the home environment? Keeping in mind, again, parents of children with disabilities we did not get a manual on how to do this. We're learning about this too. And so the more you can help to give us as families some information, the better, because that really supports your work at school and then also at home too. So I'm saying all this about partnering up in school, and I do believe that that's important. There's no doubt about that. But we don't want there to be, we don't want to empower parents to be that helicopter parent where they're hovering over their child all the time. We really want the parent to learn that it's important for children to be able to learn to count on adults and other people in their lives, and not just their parent. And it's important to allow the parent help the parent understand that they may know best about their child, but that there's always places to learn as a parent also. So, although I was saying involve the families, and I totally mean that 100%, just, you know, try, if you see this starting to go a little bit, tipping over a little bit the other way, try to gently find ways that I know you're not necessarily trained in how to do parent management, but you have to do parent management as well to be able to help that child and get to their best goal and reach their goals and have their main needs met. Okay, can you go to the next slide? So when we talk about reviews for the IFSP and for the IEP, they're slightly different. You probably already know this in Part C, the parent signatures on the consent for services. In Part B, the only time you're going to see it, because I hear this all the time, well, I refuse to sign that IEP. Well, you don't actually ever sign an IEP. A family doesn't sign an IEP. You sign a sheet that shows that you were attending that you were present at a meeting. The only time a parent is going to sign is on an IEP is permission to receive special education services. And that's prior to the initial IEP. So that's a different system for families. They're used to being able to maybe feel like they are consenting to every little thing that a student is going through when they're in that birth to 3. And then all of a sudden they're in a different system and they don't have as much, I don't want to say so, but you at the school really are holding the ability to show where the best place the needs are met in the most optimal place, in the most optimal way. So parents don't have to sign everything every year. They have to sign that they attended a meeting, or that, and also that they have received their procedural safeguards. So you will hand this to every family at every meeting. You will hand a packet of papers that say, do you want to know your rights as a parent? And so you also have to sign for that, the parents will sign that you offered that up. Parents have the right to request an IEP meeting at any time. So it's not just once a year. If they really feel like there needs to be something reviewed by the team, they can request a meeting at any time. But sometimes those things can be resolved with just having the conversation with your case manager or your teacher or the family. I am a big believer that an IEP meeting, an annual IEP meeting, should always be just the final, that we have discussed all of the elements of it prior. We've been in communication so much that the teachers will say to the parent, well, what are you seeing, and what are your thoughts about what you'd like to see for this next year? As you're, what do you think that you've seen that your child has accomplished, and then now what do you want? So, and again, vice versa, the parent should be able to say to you, what are you seeing, and what do you think we should be focusing on for the next school year? So when you're developing an IFSP or an IEP, be sure that you know who to contact if you have questions or concerns. This will be the first person you'll go to. In the case of a parent, they're going to come to their case manager. In the case of a school, and this is where it gets tricky, is that very rarely, if a family is divorced, parents are divorced, very rarely has a parent signed off on their educational rights. So even though you may be talking to mom all the time, when you have an IEP meeting, if you are doing an IEP meeting, you have to also invite dad, or you have to invite both parents, unless you know that somebody else has educational rights. And sometimes it's a surrogate right, sometimes it's in foster care. Not often, but that will come up. But you want to make sure that you are including everybody in any notification as you are starting to do the actual building blocks of that IEP to stay in compliance. Let's see. I think that's it for that one. So I'm going to skip this about a successful meeting, because I don't really have an activity, but I do want to say a couple things I do want to bring up a couple of things about meetings. When it comes to an IEP, there are, and this is something that I'm seeing a lot lately in a lot of the districts that we have. There are very few seats that have to have butts in them. There's very few butts in seats that have to happen. But you do need to make sure it happens. And so when you have an IEP meeting, you must have a general ed teacher present for the entire meeting. And that general ed teacher needs to have knowledge about the student. It can't just be that you have a general ed teacher who happens to be on a planning session, planning break in their day. It has to be somebody who has knowledge about their student, and they must stay in the meeting the entire meeting. You need to have a special education representative, the case manager, or somebody who's been designated who is overseeing the student's case. That person needs to stay there. And you also need to have somebody who's going to represent the administration of the school district. I like to say, who can write the check? And who can write the check is who's going to be able to approve services because that's where a lot of the money goes, right? Is the services for that student. And so you need to have those people there. You do not have to have the parent. You have to make every effort in multiple ways to involve the parent and invite the parent. It's not as simple as just translating the notice of meeting in Spanish to a family. You really need to make the effort to reach out to the family in the best possible way that a family can be reached. So if that is calling them, texting them, what is the best? You've established the best way to communicate by this time. What is the best way? And so you need to, I said I wasn't going to use the word best, but now I am using it. What is the most appropriate way to communicate? Let's just say that. And so you need to make every effort to have meaningful parent engagement and involvement with as you're doing the IEP and as you're having meetings. But really, it's those 3 seats that have to be filled. if you ever have me in an IEP meeting and the general ed teacher has to go because they have to go pick up their children because the meeting's going too long, we're going to stop the meeting and reschedule it. Or schedule part 2 of it. I don't get huffy. I just say, okay, that's great. But we're going to have to continue this meeting because that's a compliance issue. As you're doing, and I wanted to kind of back up about the process with the evaluations. With an IEP, there's an annual evaluation that happens, an annual IEP every year. And there's a 365-day period of time that you have to have the next meeting. Every 3 years, there is an eligibility meeting where you determine whether the student still is eligible for special education services. And you've gone through an evaluation. Sometimes it's a full-on battery evaluation by multidisciplinary. Sometimes it's a file review of something that, if nothing's really changed, but sometimes it's a combination. Parents have every right to say, if you go to them and say, well, these are the tests we're going to do. These are the elements of the evaluation we're going to do. And a parent says, I'm really concerned about, let's say occupational therapy has not been part of that students, or maybe has been, but a parent says, I'm really concerned about some of this the writing skills. That's a big one, and that you'll come to. And I really think that part of it has to do with their ability to, their fine motor skills. So I'd like to have that evaluated for my child as we're putting that into the evaluation. They have every right to ask for those things. And you need to do everything in your power to include that into your evaluations within reason. If you think it's an unreasonable request and you have a really good reason why, then have that conversation, especially as case manager, you'd be really conferring with your school policies and why you would not want to do it. But for the most part, you need to make every effort to do that. As students get older, a big one is executive functioning. That becomes a really big one that parents will notice that their children are doing work at home, but they're not turning them in, or they're not organized enough to find something. This is all executive functioning kinds of things that you would want to do evaluations for the eligibility. And so that happens every 3 years, but that doesn't negate having that annual meeting. So you still have every 3 years, you have this evaluation in addition to the annual meeting. More often than not, we have them all at the same time. We go through the evaluation portion of it first and find the eligibility, and then we move right into an IEP. I would caution you to give yourself plenty of time when you're scheduling an IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting. 45 minutes is not enough time. Oftentimes an hour is not enough time. And I know that that's really hard for you as professionals. But the more conversation you can have with your families leading up to an IEP, the more smoothly it's going to go, and you'll move through these IEPs a little bit more quickly. But that's all about that communication. And you, I believe, are the beginning, because this is how it was for me. For my child, when he was in that little bitty 6 months of his early intervention and then moved into the first years of his IEP, I was empowered to be part of that team. And so I've always felt like I could be. And so I've always felt the permission to be able to have conversation with my teams I say this now because my son is now off at college, but I always felt empowered to be part of that team and to be involved with all of that. So I always gave credit to my early intervention teams and my early childhood teams, because you're the ones who really set the stage for me of as a parent, of feeling like I could be involved and be an active part of that team, and why that was beneficial. So those are some of the tips I would say about those things, as far as making sure that that's the parent involvement. I don't know if we need to go into all the components of I don't think we do need to go into you have 60 days to do this and you have 90 days to do this. That's all in your, that will all be in your training as far as your IEP, writing IEPs and the compliance parts of that. But you can't sit on it. If there's a request for an evaluation, you can't sit on it because you can't get to it. You have times that you have to have that done. So the longest one is that initial determination that maybe something's going on. That's a 90-day period to say, yeah, we think there is, and give that whole full initial evaluation. But then after that, it's a much shorter timeline on those things. I think I've given you a lot of building blocks, but I'd love to take questions. This is sort of, I kind of just rambled through all this, and you've got my, let's see, what did we put on this? I don't, there we go. Here's some helpful websites on this last slide. Oh, I would be remiss if I did not bring up another thing that CDE, Colorado Department of Education provides, which is the parents empowering parents, and that encouraging parents, encouraging parents, and it's called the PEP conference. I didn't know, I'm sure somebody was telling me this for years. I didn't hear it because I was overwhelmed as a parent until I was probably in at least at the end part of the end of elementary school. But Parents Encouraging Parents is a very unique conference for families. They do allow educators to come in. Like 10% of the people who come into that conference are educators or providers, or physicians or students. It's unique because it is socially, we get to break down the norms as we get to break down our barriers as parents and let go of the fact that, we get to grieve. We go through the grieving process of what this was like for us. And then we can move into the building blocks of how an IEP works and what we can expect and how we can help each other. But the first part is very interpersonal, and it is an opportunity, as I said, to grieve the loss of the dream of what we thought we were going to have for our child, and then what actually did happen and what that looks like. And then we can build it. Oh, we may not have had that, but we have this. So there's a poem that's Welcome to Holland that some of you may have heard. I'm not going to read it to you, but it talks about planning to go to Italy and all these plans and all the guidebooks that you have to go to Italy and all these years that you've been working on going to Italy. Sorry, I'm going to make myself, there we go. And then you're on the plane and you're excited because you're going to Italy, and you're landed, and the flight attendant comes out and says, "Welcome to Holland." And you're in this other place that you never thought you would be in. But there's naturally beautiful things there too. And so that's what that Parents Encouraging Parents does. It is free to parents. They have 1 online and 2 in person every year. It's been going on for 40+ years. They go in different places of the state. The one in this spring will be in Grand Junction. The other one was in Fort Collins, I believe, earlier this year. And I highly encourage you to get your parents to go to that, because they can start feeling more empowered and not feeling so, they don't feel like something has happened that's damaged their lives. And they start to be able to say, it's okay to think this is hard. My son, who has autism, oftentimes would say, "I hate autism," and I'd say, "Me too. I hate it too." I mean, those were things that which were everyday things, and so parents can find each other where that's concerned. And as I said, about 10% of those attendees are professionals. It's an interesting way for you to be a fly on the wall to learn the interpersonal part of it. I will tell you too that not only am I saying that to you, that you don't know what it's like at home for these students unless you have a child with a disability, but they don't know what's going on in your lives either. And so I also say to families that remember that the person who's across the table from you also goes home at night and sits at a dinner table. You don't know if their spouse has just lost a job, if their father just died. You don't know what's going on in their lives either. So if we can come to the table and act as, with a state of grace, to be able to treat each other in that way and respect each other, it just makes all the difference. And again, I have said it a million times now. You set the stage for them for the rest of their IEP world as their child is growing up. So that's my soapbox. What questions do you have that I might be able to answer? I say might. If I don't have the answer, I'll find the answer.
I guess I have a bit of a question. I've sat in IEP meetings before as a service provider, but I'm still a little confused as from the teacher role, how does one go through the identification process? Like if you're noticing delays in your student in your classroom, what is the next step? Who do I talk to next? And how do I convey that information?
Yeah, so if I were you, or if I were the teacher, I mean, you need to somehow get it to the parent, right? You need to find a way to be able to say to the parent, this is what we're seeing. Do you happen to be seeing something like this at home? Can we talk about what you're seeing at home? And it's a way to ease into that conversation, because as you're starting to identify something, you can't evaluate, you can't create an education plan for that student without the initial the initial approval of the family. So I would say that's how I would ease into it. Hey, we're seeing this in school, and this is how it's manifesting in class. Are you seeing this in any time in this your kid's life when you're on the weekends? Are you seeing anything like this? That's how I would ease into it. Because sometimes it'll be a shock. Again, I found out when my son was 2 that they suspected that he might have autism, and I was like, wait a minute, that's not true. He talks to me. He looks at me. I was in complete denial. And his aunt, my sister, is a special education teacher. She had her master's in special education. And I called her on the phone when I left the pediatrician's office, because thankfully I had a pediatrician who said it to me, and because he wasn't making some of those milestones. And I said, oh my gosh, they're telling me that he has this, this, and this. And can you believe that? I think they're wrong. And my sister said, well, I've been putting some information together about child find to give to you. I haven't found a way to tell you, because what I didn't say is that I also had a 1-month-old at the time when my 2-year-old, but and the bottom dropped out for me, to be honest with you. I mean, my world collapsed. I thought it was the worst thing I could have ever heard. I thought my son was never going to talk, was never going to go to school, was never going to go to college. I would have never dreamed that. I mean, I thought it was the end of everything. And that's what families go through. It is this huge loss oftentimes, and that's if you find out later and it's something that's gradually you're realizing that it's a developmental, sometimes at birth, sometimes we know something at birth, obviously. And it's still a grieving process for families, but that one that happens at birth is a little bit different from as they're developing with their natural peers, what's missing, right? So find a way to gently, and I would get coaching maybe from from other professionals, like I don't know how you're a service provider, but I would definitely go to my school psych and my social worker and say, how do I bring this up? How do we broach this subject? Because the family needs to, in that initial, they have to give permission for evaluation for an IEP. So they have to know that, or you can do nothing. Once they give it, that's it. Like once they give it at age 4 or age 6, that's it. From 7, 8, 9, 10, they've already given the approval for the evaluation, unless families revoke services, which I never encourage families to revoke their services. So did that answer that question, Kiki?
Yeah, for the most part. So let me just clarify. So I would have a conversation with the parent, and then the parent needs to go to their pediatrician, and then the pediatrician is responsible?
No, not necessarily, because the medical field and the educational field are very different.
They're two different. Once I speak to the parent, what's the next step?
Child Find is a great place to start. You can direct them to Child Find. And I don't know who your Child Find representative is in Pitkin County area, so you'd have to.
I think it's Lauren Sheets.
That would be Lauren Sheets and Chelsea Weiner.
Mm-hmm. So you would call them or email them and say, listen, I have these concerns. I've talked to the parents, and we'd like to refer them to you for assessment, for evaluation.
And I might actually get them involved and see if they have some resources. I'm also going to put you on the spot, Renee. It's also an opportunity to get Aspen Family Connections involved as well, and how they might be able to approach and talk to families, especially with language. Sometimes, biculturally, it's very different. And as we're looking at, different cultures, we're looking at different responses. And so I am not a person of color. And so I am not somebody who would know how to walk in. Even now, I would not know how to broach a subject and subtly be able to talk to a family, having them feel comfortable. Whereas maybe my staff, my director of family services would be far better person if they, to talk to them. But I would probably call Renee also. I'd call Lauren and I'd call Renee. Because they're going to give you resources, and they're going to give you ideas of how you might be able to speak to families about it. But it's not, I misled you when I said that about the pediatrician. In my case, it was my pediatrician who brought it up first. But the medical, that's as important differentiation, and it's important for families to understand. The medical system is different from the educational system. They don't always say the same thing. your educational system does not have to incorporate everything that the doctors say. In best practice, you will take that into consideration, the private speech language, that you would take that into consideration, but you don't have to as a school system. And so we really want to work on that team, but they're different. They act completely separately.
Thank you.
Kind of along those lines, we just had a family that after a year of, we see some things, they finally we're so proud of them. They had a grieving process. And it was long. We all know how we could really help them if it's earlier than that, but is there I know a grieving process is different for everyone. Since you've experienced it, is there any tips on how we can support that and move it forward? I mean,
this is a place where you could call the ARC as well, and we could help to explain that whole system from a parent perspective of what that looks like. And I have to tell you that the grieving process will come up again and again and again at different times. And if the parents are married, it's going to be different for each parent. I mean, nobody's going to be on the same page at the same time. And there is no easy answer to this. And again, really that affirmation, you just said it, you said, we are so proud of them, of that particular family, because it does take a lot of courage to be able to accept and acknowledge. And this is where potentially having, it doesn't have to be the ARC, but we have a lot of resources, and we have a lot of different families that have been through different phases of this, and and that's what we do. We're not service providers, and we don't endorse any particular service provider in the Valley. We just have all kinds of resources for families. And if they need something, it's very individualized, just like the IEP is. So what do they need? And we, our staff, myself and my director of family services, are both parents of kids who have special needs. And so we get it from a very, very real place. And so it is a delicate conversation, and I don't really have a good tip for you, except to find ways. You don't want to compare one student like, oh, well, your student's not doing this, but all the other kids in the class are. You don't want to be flipped like that. You want to find a gentle way to say, this is what we're working on in the class. And I noticed this is a struggle for Susie. Are you seeing anything like this at home? And if it's their first child, they're not going to see it. Right? Like, it was my first child. I didn't see it. So, because it wasn't obvious to me in my world. So, bringing that up in a gentle way is a good way to comparing, but not talking down about it, or just not comparing, but not despairing. Does that make sense? Don't, that it's not, well, they're not making their milestones. They're not doing the same thing every other kid is doing. So, I mean, you guys, you're working with littles. You know how to be gentle with littles. So be gentle with their parents. I mean, you're so good at that. This is where you're the best at being able to communicate with these littles that, and then you go to middle school, and you have, then I really am praising everybody who works with middle school students, but it's, you've got a gift already. So use those talents and skills that that you have with children, and apply that to how you're going to speak to the parents. But I would always find you can say, I have some ideas, and I have some resources for you if you're ready to see them. And I'm more than happy to walk you through this, and then do the warm handoff.
Great. Thank you very
Send
much.
it to Pep. Well, they won't know because they haven't already done this. They haven't gone through it yet. They're not. Anybody else I know I blew through that IEP components. Is there anything that's confusing, or that you want clarification on about specifically about an IEP that I can, or an IFSP, although it's much different now? Mallory.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I know you briefly touched on
that a diagnosis isn't always more beneficial to help children receive services and things like that. Would you mind just, I guess, clarifying about that? Because I guess I had thought it always was better, so.
So I believe I was saying that using a specific disability when it was relating to the IEP process, as opposed to a diagnosis. So they're different things for me. A diagnosis is something medical. Sometimes families don't want to label their child, but their child still would still qualify under IDEA and qualify through your eligibility process. So as far as a diagnosis, and that's that medical piece of it. So another example would be some families don't want to take on their child. I mean, some physical disabilities are obvious, right? You can see that, but some of those invisible disabilities are harder to see. And sometimes families don't want to put that label on their child. That doesn't mean that they're not eligible for services through IDEA and FAPE, which is that FAPE. I didn't bring up that word, which is that free and appropriate public education. And that's what IDEA protects, is that FAPE. So you will be, as you're writing goals and as you're putting in those those related services, you're going to be focusing on the individual student and what their needs are, not what their disability is. So if you, and I'm just going to use autism just because it's my kid, right? So you're going to be supporting him and what his needs are versus, oh yeah, right, we need to keep in mind that he he probably has some social quirkiness, because that's part of what the diagnosis is, or the disability is. You're still, no matter what it is, you're still going to be meeting his needs. And if his needs are, if he's perfectly fine with communication and working with other students and playing with other students, that's not where you're going to be working on. You're going to be working on potentially that language arts skill or that math skill that he needs help with. So you can always keep in mind what the disability is, but don't lead with the disability. And some parents don't want you to talk about the disability. Some parents still don't want to talk to their kids about what the disability that they have. So you have to test your waters. You have to use the temperature gauge of your waters on that. But always be thinking about, as you're doing your evaluations, what is that showing you? Not what is the disability telling you? And oftentimes it's the same, but it doesn't have to be. That's what I meant by that. And a medical diagnosis could potentially help you, but it might not. Like, it's not uncommon to have a kid who is medically diagnosed with autism who is not eligible for special education services. They don't need any help accessing the educational environment, and they don't need an IEP. Freaks families out, but that it's not uncommon. So a medical diagnosis does not automatically say that you need an IEP, and you don't necessarily have, you can have an IEP without having a medical diagnosis. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? They don't always interchange. That makes sense. Yeah. How do you pronounce your name, Marielle?
Murray.
Murray. Say, I got a
Murray. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we rely on an assessment system called TS Gold to follow developmental milestones and just kind of get an idea of where children are. How effective do you think it is to lean on that type of an assessment to, get to the point, well, I think it's time we talk to parents? What's the balance between that type of an assessment and what we observe daily in a classroom, which would give us some clues as to, I think something's off here?
That might actually really really help you, because you're talking about a system that you're using for all students. And you may don't get too technical, but and you're going to get that when you start using different evaluation tools. You're going to get really technical about the numbers and how they're scoring and things. But I think that might actually be very helpful when it comes to trying to describe some of the gaps And you want to lead with their strengths. Obviously, you want to, I always sandwich it, right? The strengths at the beginning and then where their deficit is, and then the strength at the end, so that families leave feeling like they leave in a positive way. But I think that can actually really help you with that, and using it as a comparison tool, and that I would potentially lean on. But at the same time, understanding that every kid is different and learning styles are different. And it's just an opportunity for a communication, a conversation starter, I would think. And then I don't know how much you all are using the MTSS system, where you're doing multi-tiered systems of support. And that's prior to special education. So that's also a whole other piece that we didn't talk about, that you still want to engage families in that, and what you're doing to try to bridge that gap prior to talking about an full-on evaluation for special education.
So basically, we kind of have to draw from all of the tools that we have to get to a point where we would address a potential issue with parents. Really, in terms of a protocol, I'm trying to imagine what a protocol would look like.
Right? You're gonna say, not sure what's happening, especially at this age. Not sure what's happening here, but I think something's happening here. And then you will do that multi-tiered systems of support that happens. You still by that time are engaging parents. Okay. So there's a pretty small amount of time that you're not talking to parents. I mean, you want to
you'll always be talking to them, I think.
Yeah.
But if we are to approach parents with, a heavier, like a heavier suspicion, I'm just trying to figure out how to, how much information do we have to gather first, and what our sources are going to be, so that when we do talk to parents, that we're coming from a place of, that we can support what we're saying.
Yeah, I would always use
it's not just a hunch. It's not just a hunch.
I would always use your data, and I would deliver it with compassion.
Deliver data with compassion. That's beautiful. Okay, that works for me.
And then, Marae, when we kind of look about, some things that you can do in the meantime is, that folder of data collection for the different areas, the ABC, OT or PT, all of those things, all those little data collections. A lot of the times you can just do an ASQ, just to kind of start. And then as Jill said, TS Gold is going to show those gaps. They're going to show them. And also what Jill said, having that conversation with the parents, if you say, what are you seeing at home? 9 times out of 10, they're probably seeing the same thing or more. So those parents they're the guide, they're the guiding stars, and they're the ones who are going to give you basically a lot of that information to then proceed where you need to go.
But I'm also going to tell you, Renee, I'm also going to say, and I'm going to go back to my comparison from myself. It was my oldest son. And so I didn't know what I didn't know, even though I was an older parent and there were other kids around. I didn't see the forest for the trees. So it is an opportunity to say, what are you seeing at home? And would maybe you can start to think about and let us know, watch, keep an eye out, tell us what you're seeing after, we brought this up now, for the next couple of weeks, take some notes on what you see at home. So then they start to potentially start looking at it too, because it may be shocking and they may not see it, what you're seeing. And so if you give them an exercise, so to speak, so that they can start to open their eyes a little bit wider of what they're seeing. I don't have a good example of that. I always come up with what you're doing, sorting. I always bring up sorting as one, because that's such a simple one that kids are always doing, or sitting, how long can your child, are you seeing anything at dinner time, meal times, is your kid kind of, because we see that with sitting still, and are you seeing anything at home? And what's the dinner? What is it like at dinner? What's it like at breakfast? Sometimes things like that of equate.
And then recording observations, I imagine, just like things that we see that we record.
And the flip side of this is that parents are going to come to you sometimes and say, I'm concerned. I'm seeing something. I think something's not, I'm concerned about, I've had, I just don't think that my kid I think my child should be doing this or seeing this or being able to ABCs or whatever it is, I'm concerned. And that we get calls often from families that feel like they're not being heard when they do want to have something looked at, when they do want to dig a little bit deeper. So finding that balance on the other end of it too is also important. Because I'm telling you, parents know stuff. Right, Renee? Parents know stuff.
They sure do. They sure do. I want to piggyback on the PEP thing as a parent of special education, childhood, special needs child, and as a teacher. Oh my God, I learned so much, and I keep going back as many times as I can. So it is very empowering for, both educators and parents. It's incredible. My other question is that we are in such a unique situation in Aspen where we're lucky enough to, have the kids with IEPs in different programs. So the services are coming, to the schools. And I just wanted to maybe ask you, Jill, as the general educator or the preschool teachers, what are their direct roles in the IEP teams? Because they have other service providers collecting the data and doing the evaluations, but what are their roles? How do they approach the IEP meeting? What do they need to do?
I see it as that's part of the team. I mean that because that educational environment is not all about related services. It's, it is, just like I think parents have that unique PhD on their own kids, they're the experts on that. I think that your teachers, whether they're especially general ed and especially in this age group, this age bracket of kids, you're really experts on seeing development fast. You see a lot of it fast. So I'm hoping that if you are not specifically special education or related service, I'm hoping that you have a way to be able to say, I would really like to be part of this team because I think I have some really good ideas about how we can support. And I know that this Susie's going to be in my class, and I would really like to be able to try some of these things in my class because I think it might be really helpful. Or these are some of the things that I am seeing in the class and I'd love some help with. I just feel like that all of that all that collaboration is important. And that's all communication to begin with. It's just all that communication piece. You don't have to be the expert to want to be a part of the team. You don't have to be the expert on everything to want to be part of the team. Your piece of it is you're not you don't have to be the superhero. You can come in and your part is really important no matter what that part is. So Renee, are you saying that you sometimes feel that the teacher's voice isn't heard in the team?
Sorry, I had unmuting issues. I don't know. I want to put it out there to the teachers. How do you guys feel when you're coming into an IEP meeting? Do you feel a bit confused about what your role is, or do you know what you need to be doing and how it all rolls?
In my experience, and because this is our first year of really being a part of the team, because we've always had to send the children to the school district, I feel like we can throw out ideas that we can do, whereas the PT or OT, they might say, oh yeah, and what if you did this? So I feel like we can kind of volley back and forth, which is kind of exciting because then you feel like you have a direction to go.
I feel that, we all, as Jill mentioned, that we're all a team. And so as she said, in the educational environment, we're seeing things happen quickly. To advocate for ourselves within an IEP meeting, I think we need to bring to the table what we have observed and have it just be part of what is integrated in maybe the plan for things that are coming up, and just keep the conversation going. I'm a real strong believer in communication logs. And if we have communication logs or observation logs, or we can write things down, be it on a computer or whatnot, then we're always backing ourselves up. And I think that's how we can be effective and as team members,
I agree. Just because from being in an IEP meeting, I feel as a teacher, we have such a wealth of knowledge and we know that child so well. And it's a really nice, like you say, you might see what we sing at school is different to home. And from being in them before, I've really enjoyed the other therapies asking me questions and being able to share that knowledge. I think it's a nice role to be in.
I think you're in an exciting age of kids where there is so much possibility and so much creativity. I think that as children get older and as they go into, full on elementary and then middle school and then high school, it's the systems are I feel like they're much more rigid and they're much more, they're not as creative. You can think out of the box when they're younger and really try a lot of creative different things. Because there's not as children get older and as the students get older, then they're not as open. They're not as open when they're, you've got an 8th grade boy who does not want to have a special ed teacher or a para sitting on top of him in a classroom because he's embarrassed, right? So, I mean, you have an opportunity with this age group to be able to do so much. So, yeah, I think it's amazing. And parents, I think, are more open to creativity of how they can be using the information you're giving at home as well. I started this by saying that butts in seats, the general education teacher and even a special education teacher, you have to have those at the meeting. You can't just stop in and stop out because you're an integral part of it. So. And
Jill, we have
you come back. I'll stop the meeting until you come back to the table.
We have a couple people who've had to jump off, but I wanted to let everybody know that I will send out your certificates probably early next week, and we'll make sure that you have Jill's contact information. And Jill, we really appreciate you doing this presentation for us. It's a new thing for us in Pitkin County to have special services in the community childcare centers. And it feels like such a victory because for so many years, so many of us have been fighting for that. And so to be included in those meetings, and I'm looking at Tina and saying, to be included in those meetings and finally have a voice and be able to have those conversations with families and get that information and share that information back and forth, have the goals, know what they are, be able to support the children is amazing. And having trainings like this just builds those skills even more. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I would just add to this one more thing. I tried to keep it kind of loose and we didn't look at an actual document. We didn't look at what those all look like. We are more than happy, because this is what we do with families too. We are more than happy to go through the different parts of the IEP and what they mean and the language that is used. Please do not ever feel like that you don't, like I tell parents, you're not dumb. It's not about being dumb. This is a new thing. This is I think special education is a totally different language. So you're just learning a different language. So I would invite you to call us and we will walk through. If you ever want to say, I don't get this whole IEP thing and what this means and why they have to go in this order and all, whatever, as simple as it may be or as complicated as it may be, we're more than happy to help you to understand those components of what you're looking at in that document and how it comes together. Because people just keep going, you've got people who've been doing this for a long time just kind of barrel through things, but that's not, when you're learning something, you need to understand it and understand it the correct way so that you don't ever have to learn it in a bad moment when you've done something out of compliance. We're more than happy to walk you through. And maybe that's another training that you may want to do where you actually take an IEP and we look at the components of the IEP and what it looks like in literally black and white, all those words in black and white. So we can certainly go deeper into it. We just wanted to kind of do that 101 kind of thing tonight. Or you can call me individually if you want.
Or we can try to schedule a part 2 next month or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, I really so appreciate you having us here, and you've got my information. Renee knows how to find me in many different ways, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if I am never going to make something up if I don't have the answer. I'll brainstorm it with you, but if I need to find an answer, I'll go find an answer. I feel very strongly about that, so I'm happy. I hope you feel empowered, because that's what I'd really like. So. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jill.
You bet.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks everybody for
Bye.
joining us.
Thank
Thank you.
Have a good night.